Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 28, Your First Website Contract. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Karan. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Hey, Matt. What haven't I been up to this week? So these last, I don't know, even like you could say 24, 48 hours have been crazy. Just an insane amount of contract work. Matt and I were talking about it before the podcast started, but we're even considering bringing some contractors on, potentially very asterisks. Don't know when that's going to be, but potentially, within the next month or two or something like that. And it could be one of you. I don't know. Like, we're going to be looking at all our options at that point, and maybe if people are interested, they could, contact us on Twitter or Instagram and, throw their hat in the ring. We'd love to have a chat and potentially, again, no guarantees at this point, but we could be bringing on some more team members. So that's pretty exciting. And yeah, that's about it. HTML All the Things kind of unfortunately was put on the back burner for me. I had to edit that video that I promised with Vue.js, and I just couldn't get to it because just work just kept piling in, and, had to put out fires here and there. I don't know. It's all good. Like, I'm not complaining, but wish I could have got some more HTML All the Things stuff done. Yeah, that's about it. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I've also been busy. I sort of do the more, I was going to say small business, but I'm kind of small and medium business stuff now. So, and I'm also going to be taking some of the tasks from your side as well, here and there as well. So I'm kind of like all over the place. I've always kind of been like that, though. I don't like to be like tied down to one project or something like that. So I'm kind of bouncing around like crazy, doing the show, like doing this podcast, doing random client work that's like repeat, doing new client work that's coming in, and we've been doing that for about the last week. And so it's kind of been a crazy week as well. One of the things that we had discussed was we have a new segment idea for the show. It's not going to be in this episode, because this episode is being shot or recorded very late. I am sick and Mike is tired. So it's not gonna be in this episode, but we want to do a recurring, but like an optional recurring. Like, it won't be every week like Web News. It'll be just whenever we think is gonna happen, and it's gonna be about helpful resources that we find online. So that, like, kind of look forward to that, because I have a couple of bookmarks here and there that I find really useful, that I think you guys will find useful as well. So that's going to be something that we're going to be coming up. Also, we were talking right before this big kind of bubble of content work kind of came through, was one of the ideas we had for a content plan for HTML All the Things, other than the podcast, is to keep things in one topic. So every week we do the podcast, and it's generally on one topic, one segment of the industry, one specific thing or idea, right? It's kind of a little more abstract, but it's like we could, it's kind of like you're pigeonholing yourself into one idea, but it's every week. And what I was thinking was, instead of us trying to bounce around ideas where it's like, let's say this week, prime example is Your First Website Contract, which is for beginners, which is this episode. Instead of us making an episode of the podcast for beginners now, and then me trying to write a Medium article for like super experienced people, in a couple of days, my mindset isn't there. So since the podcast is our anchor, it's our weekly thing, it's something that we always do, barring holidays and sickness or partial sickness. As I said, I'm sick now. What I think what we should do is we should use the podcast as a topic decider. I know that's the wrong way to say it, but basically it's like, if I want to make a Medium article this week, or if I want to make something else other than maybe a tidbit or maybe something else, I'm not saying that's going to happen this week. This is a content plan, to be clear, but it would be nice to kind of keep it all in the same topic, and then it's all, fresh in our minds. We can actually refer to our own show notes to get ideas on how to write things. We could even take our show notes and then write like a more detailed thing in writing, like regarding one of our segments, let's say from even this episode. We could take that, go to Medium, write like a proper like article or essay or whatever you want to call it, but then so it's all in the same topic. So I know it's getting a bit long-winded, but that's basically what we've been talking about. So look forward to that. I also mentioned Discord, also look forward to that. I didn't get around to that this week, but we'll be announcing that everywhere you'd expect on the show, no doubt. We're also looking at possibly getting a guest as well. We're in talks about that, so another guest that should be pretty interesting, and I kind of have a cool idea for the episode structure, which I haven't run by anyone yet. Everything is totally theoretical, not like nothing's together yet, so take everything I'm saying right now with a grain of salt, but this is sort of what our mindset is going forward. But anyway, let's kind of jump into this episode, because it's one of those episodes that could be really short, or not really short, but it could be short, but it kind of looks like it's long because the show notes are kind of detailed. So basically, in this episode, we're assuming that your first website contract that you will be doing professionally will be rather simple. Now, sometimes you can get stuck with a rather large project, but generally speaking, people who are jumping into the professional game, especially if they're jumping onto like a freelancer site, will, again, in general, take on an easy site. So what we're kind of assuming is what we call like a business card site. So it's like, company name, contact, address, about us, maybe some social links. Generally, there's no CMS, so there's no database or anything to worry about. It's just really like a small business that needs like just a presence online, but they don't, write articles or anything like that online. So that's kind of what we're doing. And I'm going to let Mike kind of take off with it once I just go through the segments here. So segment number 1 is gathering requirements. So that'll be so Mike will be describing exactly what I'm talking about in a little bit more detail, so you understand like what the premise of this episode is. Segment number 2 is design and iteration. Segment number 3 is development. Segment number 4 is deployment. And then finally, the recurring segment, web news, which is going to be Android desktop and Chrome OS. So I'm going to toss it off to Mike for that very first segment there, gathering requirements. Take it away, Mike.
All right, Matt. So we've talked about requirements a few times, but this whole conversation that we're going to have today is going to be very specific to a typical first site that a developer will have to do for their first project. Obviously, everyone's first project is a little bit different, but a lot of the time when you're first starting to become a developer, you're looking for something kind of basic. You're hoping for something that will, get you comfortable with the whole process of communicating with the customer, delivering something on time, stuff like that. So this is kind of the scenario that I see very often happen to a first-time client or a first-time web developer. So in this scenario, let me paint a picture in your mind. There's a small business that contacts you called Happy Coffee. It has approached you with a request for their old site to be updated. The site is from the early 2000s and very old. It's not responsive and has outdated information about their business on it. So they need you to update their online presence. They don't need you to create a whole shopping experience. They don't need you to make it so that people can order anything from the site. No extensive features. The budget is fairly small. They don't want to waste too much time, too much money on the effort of driving traffic to their store. They're more of a word of mouth business, but they want to make it so that their current customers and the future customers will go to there and feel like they're a professional business and not like a rinky-dink, operation that can't even update their website for a decade. So that's kind of where they're coming from. You've had the back and forth already with them, and this is what you've got from them. So the first thing, your job is to figure out what the client's preferences are, and then you want to align your visions, so both your vision for the site and your client's vision to the site to the same kind of structure that you're going to be working with. So first thing that I like to really do is ask them to send you some sites of their competitors that they like. And then ask them not only to do that, but highlight the sections specifically in those sites that appeal to them. So like if they really like the, about section of this site, make sure that they, specify that that's what they really like about it. If they really don't like a certain section, make sure that they try to specify, have this conversation with them beforehand, and then let them send you a few sites, maybe an email, maybe have a discussion over the phone. Again, depending on how the client likes to communicate, every client's a little bit different. So you got to gauge how this one will want to communicate with you. And that's how you're going to be communicating throughout the whole process, obviously. So once you have some of these sites, you want to lay out some specific features that this kind of basic business card, in quotes, or online presence site is going to need. So typical things that a site like this will need is large cover images, a large cover image with some text, maybe like their logo somewhere there and stuff like that. A services offered section, So what kind of coffee they sell? Are they a coffee shop? Or do they still just sell coffee? Kind of like that. A map of the location, like where can people find them? Hours of operation, how to contact them. Those are big things for a business card site. Obviously, what do you see on a business card? The contact information. That's the most important thing, arguably. Sometimes with a business card site, if it's one of those things where people they want people to land on the page and call them right away, you want to make sure you focus on the contact information. I like to put it up maybe in the top bar, like just, the phone number or the email, whatever preference they want for contact, right in the top bar, right in the nav bar, so that the first thing people see is that contact, and they can just contact them right away. Another section that they could have is an Our Story kind of section where you can put some, content, some text, help with a little bit with SEO in that kind of way, pick out some keywords from their competitors, combine it, create a good cohesive story section. I like I said, I like to use as much content as I can, but keep it minimalistic as well. Content helps the Google crawler to understand what the site is and helps it index it. So having no content is a bad idea. Because some customers will push on you and be like, listen, I don't have any time. I can't create any content for you. And I don't even want anything personal on the site, but you have to push back and make sure that they at least have some generic content even, to put on there, just so that they can get indexed and get a good understanding, like a Google can get a good understanding of what they do. Another thing that they could have is a photo gallery and, of course, a contact form. So you need to gauge their interest in all of these different features that the site could have. If it can, of course, have other sites, gauge yourself what other features you would want to work on. Keep in mind that, again, this is probably a lower budget site. You don't want to overstretch yourself too much in a site like this. Even though this is your first project, you're excited, you want to get as much done as possible, but you want to also make sure that it's going to be completed on time and it's feasible with your skills that you have now. So make sure that you're only offering things that you're comfortable to build and comfortable to learn how to implement. And again, like I was talking about that content, sometimes it's really hard to get that content out of people. And actually, our previous episode, the difficulty of communicating with customers, we talk about how this can be kind of a negative experience getting content from your customer, and really you want to make sure that it's not. And sometimes what it takes is for you to actually take the initiative and either create that content yourself. So sometimes you'll have to copyright, you'll have to create the about section yourself, go on the competitors' websites, see what the about sections are on there, see about the story sections, and kind of see what their story, maybe, just ask a few questions of your client and then, write that text up yourself. It doesn't have to be long, but sometimes it's what's required because you just can't wait on the customer to just not give you it. You know what I mean? And then the other thing is pictures, images of the business. So if you're local and the customer doesn't have good images, it might be worthwhile for you to go there one day while you're driving by and maybe take some pictures with a DSLR. Worst case scenario, a nice phone camera will do for the most part for a small business website. Obviously, the better pictures, the better it is. But you got to work with what you have if this is your first client. You really want to make sure that you don't use those old 2000 pictures though, unless of course they were done in a professional level and you have access to the raw images. Usually what happens is they're very compressed, they're very low quality, they're usually a very strange aspect ratio, and even though the customer is very fond of them, you want to kind of convince them that it needs to be updated. Like, not only does the site need to be updated, the content, sometimes the logo needs to be updated. To save some money for logo updates, I still kind of recommend using a thing called Fiverr, a website called Fiverr. It's a external contracting website. It's no longer really one of those things where you can pay $5 and get something tangible. It used to be, actually, and we did get a few tangible things from that before. But right now, it's probably in the $50 to $100 range to get a tangible logo, which isn't bad at all as well, as long as the logo actually looks good in the end. You want to look for reputable contractors there. There's a fairly good marketplace there for reputable contractors. This is if you're on a very low budget and you just need to get something. And it's very easy to sell your client if they're willing to spend a little bit of money to expand their, to bring them into our century, into the new development standards. You want to make sure that because this is as much a business card for you as well. That's another thought process, is like, if you have to go out of pocket a little bit for this, like if you have to, not charge as much, or maybe, get that $50 logo and not charge your customer as your first site, that might be a good trade-off, because you're going to be presenting this to your potential clients in the future who you might be charging more money from, and you don't want to be presenting them with a pile of poop. It's just the reality of it. So try to get it as professional and as together as you can. Now, look at 5 years down the line, you're going to look back on it and be like, oh wow, what was I thinking, and stuff like that. But you can't think about that while you're doing it. So just kind of do your best. Don't worry. I'm sure it'll look great as long as you kind of put your effort into it, put your knowledge into it. You either went through a boot camp, you went through school, you have some experience building your own sites. Just use that experience to all of your ability, and really create something that you can be proud of for something like this. So this, like, it's important, like this will kind of give you a great starting point. So, and it'll for either creating a static site from scratch or choosing a template to fill in as well. I'm kind of I'm for a first site, and if you have the time, I kind of push towards choosing a static site, but obviously both options are fairly common and will be used. Again, I like, time permitting, create your own to like learn as much as you can from this experience. Now, usually during the more general portion of this process, you'll be also discussing pricing, but I'm going to intentionally leave that part out of it, as it's a whole other can of worms. Pricing is a really tough one. And I will probably be doing a separate episode on pricing in the future, so stay tuned for that. But don't do it for free is my recommendation. So I know a lot of people want to do like their first website for free, just for the, exposure. It's almost like, it's a tough one, because sometimes you don't really have a choice, and it's a good opportunity, and maybe it does make sense. But I would usually lean on the side that a professional business wouldn't ask you to do something for free as a favor or something like that. It's a business to business relationship in this case, and if you have to take a discount, that's fine. You have to be reasonable with your price, but try not to do it for free, because this is part of the interaction. Like, you have to learn how to get the money out of the experience, right? Like, you have to learn to be able to ask for appropriate amounts of money for the appropriate work you're doing. That's part of the experience of becoming a freelance web developer. That's part of the experience of becoming a web designer. It's just one of those things that you have to cross, and I think even on the first website, it's still very viable. You should still be pushing to get some tangible money out of it. It shouldn't be a lot. It shouldn't be, because you have to take the fact that the client is also taking a risk on you, choosing you and paying you this money, and so you have to sacrifice and balance the fact that you're sacrificing a little bit of price for the client's risk. So that's my suggestion. I'm not going to talk about actual pricing structure right now. Again, we might talk about that in a future episode. So I'll pass it off to Matt if he has anything to add for this segment, or move on to the next one.
I think I just want to reiterate the whole thing about pricing, because I mean you said that a lot. I think the only real comment I have is, like, don't necessarily do it for free. Mike's right in saying that you really need to learn how to extract that money from people, and that really sounds kind of menacing when you say, like, extract the money from them.
Extract, yeah.
But, like, the thing is like, there are, just like how there's like different classes of, like, there's like guys who've been in the industry for 10 years, 2 years, 1 year, maybe you're at the 1 year stage, whatever. If you're just starting out, there's different classes of like web developer, just in terms of seniority, but there's also different classes of client in terms of what they're willing to pay. And some people will always try to gouge people. Some people will always try to pay the lowest price. And we all want like a low price, but if they're not, sometimes they're literally not valuing your service because they don't see, their online presence as being very important to them. And sometimes they just literally do this to everyone, where they always want to pay, the closest to $0 as possible. And you don't want to get caught in the trap. And we still struggle with this to this day. You don't want to get caught in the trap of getting stuck with clients who literally pay $0. You never want to get stuck in that sort of trap. And that's one of the hardest things to do, is because you'll get stuck in like the low tier of customer, like paying customers. And you may have like 50 customers even, Like if you're on like some sort of marketplace like Fiverr and you're offering, you know, really basic web development services on there, because you can do that as well, on that website that Mike mentioned, Fiverr. Like you could have like 50 customers if you have run a successful business on there, but you might be being paid like $100 a day for working on 10 people's things a day. And so maybe that's good for you, like good for you to start out or whatever. But, you know, there are ways to get, you know, kind of higher level clients. Not saying that the people who can't afford a lot of like the higher rates are bad or anything, but sometimes they literally are just trying to gouge you. So a lot of the time, if you go to a consultant in general, a lot of consultants will actually say, or we've had people who like we know who are kind of like mentors who've been in the industry a little while, and they often will say like, watch your customer base. Like, don't let your customer base become all these small businesses that do not pay anything, that want like a bunch of stuff for free, that want to call you at any time and not pay for your time. So it's just something you got to watch yourself, you know, gauge it. Like, am I getting good portfolio work out of this? Can I do this price? If you cannot do the price, then you just can't do the price, because they're the same way, right? If they can't meet your price, then they just can't meet your price sometimes. And it, you know, it's, you just peacefully walk away. You just, you know, politely just say, hey, you know, no worries, we can't work together on this. It's no big deal, and everything's fine. But just watch that customer base. Don't always go with the lowest, you know, with the lowest dollar amount. Sometimes you got to kind of negotiate up. But just something to keep in mind, because we've fallen into that trap a few times, and pricing is still, like I said, something we struggle with years into this. So on to segment 2 then. So segment number 2, design and iteration. So generally when someone wants a basic website, especially when it's a small business, they'll want to keep the budget low. So back to that pricing thing again. Cutting down on hours is probably one of the easiest ways to lower the price for a customer, and having a basic design allows you to cut some of the hours out while maintaining quality. So oftentimes, like on larger client sites, so larger than this coffee shop scenario, like we said, they like oftentimes like larger clients will want a wireframe and a prototype, and like maybe like something that's where it's just like a Photoshop of it, so like a fully done up image of it, however you want, a mock-up, whatever you want to call it. They'll want everything, right? The wireframe, the mock-up, the full visual thing, everything before you start developing. But when it comes to like a smaller project like this coffee shop scenario, we generally will actually skip a lot of those steps. So we'll skip any sort of prototyping, we'll skip any sort of mock-ups, we'll skip any of that, and we'll rely solely on a wireframe for visual aid. And as a brief aside, some of our larger clients actually accept this scenario as well. So they accept wireframes as the basis of their design in order to, for number one, keep costs down, get those hours down, and number two, to get the project up and running as quickly as possible. Because sometimes people are just like, I don't really care. Like, as long as you're making it within modern standards, I want this up, I want it now because I want to get moving. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs like that, and we're happy to abide by that. Like, that's totally fine with us. But anyway, so back to the whole wireframe idea with the small business. So typically we'll make 3 to 4 wireframe layouts based on what the customer has requested. And oftentimes we'll get a few reference sites, and Mike mentioned this already, but we'll get a few reference sites like from them, you know, during the gathering requirements stage. And we'll try to like use those to speed up our wireframe stuff, because it's like, oh, they seem to like full page or full screen sites. Oh, they seem to like more traditional designs. And then you can kind of, you know, go when you're making your wireframes, you can make 3 or 4 traditional designs or a couple of the more modern designs of different layouts and that type of thing, just to try to give them a little bit of choice within their range of what they like. So after showing off those wireframe designs, we'll get the client to choose their favorite one, and you can get general feedback from them if they're generally not happy with any. We've had that a few times where someone's like, I don't like, you know, 1 through 4, like designs 1 through 4, I'm not happy with them. Sometimes they'll want to mix and match, or we'll get them to mix and match. So they'll be like, okay, you know, I like the slider from design 1, the footer from design 3, I like the font from this one, whatever, right? So just stuff like that, like mix and match the pieces. Sometimes they're happy with, you know, putting it all together like a puzzle. But this part of the procedure, and this is really critical, and this part of the procedure can take anywhere from a few hours if they're just a person who just wants to get going, to over a week. depending on how involved your client is and how involved they'd like to be on the design. Sometimes the design will flip-flop between a few options before finally landing on the one that will be actually put into production. So this step does take patience. Oftentimes you'll have people just not answer. Sometimes you'll have people that will literally never answer again. You'll get to this stage and then they'll just disappear. This will often happen if it's a newer client that you've never worked with before. Maybe they've changed their mind and or they completely forgot about it or whatever. Always send like a follow-up email, of course. Don't just rely on it. But, oftentimes this part is kind of tumultuous. It's because it really relies on the client getting back to you and you guys actually kind of having a nice conversation back and forth over what should be done on the site. So it's a very opinionated phase because you have an opinion, they have an opinion. In general, especially if this is your first site, as we're toting this episode as, you've never worked with them before, they've never worked with you, and you've never worked with a client. So it's it's the whole formula. So just something to keep in mind. One thing to note is that all clients are different. All clients are different, but from our experience, if you're struggling with the basics of choosing one of the designs you've made, so for example, the client doesn't like any of them, sometimes you need to have a discussion with them to reiterate what those goals are to ensure that you're on the same page. For example, you might be focusing on showing off their photos that they have on the site while they actually don't care about that, and they just really want people to see that phone number and just call the office. Like, it's just literally a web presence to them. They just want to, you call my physical location because I'm selling suits or whatever they're selling. That's what they want. So you sometimes have to reiterate what the goal is, because sometimes that'll get lost in translation and get lost in that mingling, like I said, of the conversation of all the different opinions. So this part does require patience. I want to beat that point into the ground. It requires patience, and it's not always, I shouldn't say always, but this is the point of the cycle where things will break down, if anything breaks down in general. This is the part where we've gotten stuck with so many clients where they've actually just completely backed out. It's awkward, but you'll master this. You'll master talking to clients in the way that they understand. You'll master getting these skills up and running to actually make these communications a lot easier, and to actually sort of prompt people to get them excited to actually answer you if they're a person that doesn't like to answer email often or very, very much. Luckily, with simple designs, the selection procedure is often the least painful. So that's one good thing for you if you're doing a website like this, and you can be right off to development in no time. And I'll use that to pass it right off to Mike, unless he has any other comments to talk about segment number 3.
All right. No, I'll probably move on to segment number 3. You covered that very well. So segment number 3, development. So since this is a simple static site, it's fairly straightforward. I mean, for the first one, I would hope it will be. It's not always the case. We, unfortunately, as a side story, we had a quite complicated first site. It was static initially. I think we mentioned this a couple times before, but we were first designing a static site. And then when we already put it in production, and after a few months of updating it, we were asked to make it a CMSable site. So that was a whole headache. So make sure, again, talking about requirements before this, make sure you nail that right in the requirements phase, because that could have been solved with more questioning, more pushback on our side, more back and forth, where we wouldn't have to go back and recreate the site in a CMS format. So, but let's assume that this is a legit static site and you've already had that back and forth. The development side of it. So the choices here, again, I've already talked about this. Go with a template or start the site from scratch. We're going to talk more about starting the site from scratch, because if time allows, that would be my recommendation. Again, nothing wrong with going with a template. It's a totally viable solution, but let's talk about the one that I would recommend. The workflow I do when I'm creating a site from scratch, or at least for one of my first sites that I would create, now my workflow is a little bit different, but I would recommend kind of going through a stage of workflow, starting with a base structure workflow and then moving up and making it more complicated as you go. I would create a file structure first, and you can do this a couple of ways. I did it initially manually without using any package managers or anything like that. But if you just went through some sort of a boot camp, or you went through school and that's the way you did it through Webpack and Babel and stuff like that, and tools that you learned throughout that. Don't use the tools that you learned, right? Like, if you haven't gone through that and you just want to learn web development from scratch, there's nothing wrong with making it manually and creating the file structure manually from scratch as well, especially for a simple site like this. It's not a big deal. So I'll focus more on the simple file structure because that's what I'm assuming. But again, if you know how to use Webpack already because of education or because of experience, there's nothing wrong with that. So when creating the folder structure, you want to create like the initial folders, this CSS, HTML, CSS folder, the JS folder. You want to create an image folder, get your basic folders. I don't think unless your site becomes exceedingly complicated, you might need to create a library folder. Depending on if you're going to be pulling in any libraries. I'm going to assume that no, this is a basic, happy coffee site. You're going to have a header, you're going to have an our story section, a contact section, maybe a photo gallery. That's about it. So there's not much there that you would need a library for, though. I guess the one thing that you could use is a lightbox for the gallery. So you know what? Create a library folder. There's nothing wrong with that as well. I usually call it lib. So basic file structure. I'm sure you've seen them before. Follow those rules. Create your basic files, your index.html, your main.css, main.js, and then also a mailer.php if you have a contact form. So for the HTML, I like to create the structure of the entire site. So when I'm creating the HTML, that's one of the first things I do. I create the basic structure like the HTML tags, the head tags, all the meta tags that I'm going to need in there. I like to save a very basic boilerplate when I'm doing this too, so that next time I do it, it's a quicker startup. But the first time, we're assuming it's the first time. If it's the first time you're doing it, create that basic boilerplate. Maybe branch it off into a different project called boilerplate or something, template, something like that, so that your next site that you create is accelerated by that structure. But continuing forward, I try to keep the structure of the HTML as basic as possible with the fewest container divs as I can. I don't like containers within containers within containers. I know the box method, you used to have to do that. The float method was very you had to kind of put containers within containers. Bootstrap is very, very container centric. I'm anti-containers, I guess you would say. Not that obviously I still use them. Sometimes you have to put containers and rows and stuff like that. But as much as I can, I try to make it a very flat structure. So with that in mind, you create your structure top to bottom, especially if it's a single page application. I like to create at least one page top to bottom, the full HTML structure. If you have content, input the content right there inside your image tags. If you don't have content, use some placeholder images. You can use some lorem ipsum if you don't have the text content yet, but make sure that there's something there that you can style, that you can manipulate to your liking, so that it makes it a lot easier if you don't have the content when you get it, to just place it in there, and that's it. For my CSS recommendation, Flexbox. I'm a big proponent of Flexbox right now. I love Grid, but Flexbox is supported by a lot of browser versions. It's more widely supported right now than Grid. Maybe if you're listening to this a year or two after the episode came out, I would recommend Grid for something like this. Or if you're doing some sort of a Babel conversion, an ES6 conversion method, compatibility method, you could probably use Grid as well, because it'll handle that for you. But if you're doing a basic static site like we're talking about, Flexbox is the way to go, in my opinion. It's supported on most browsers. Doesn't require you to create a backwards compatibility or fallback CSS, unless you're really worried about the Internet Explorer 8 experience, which, let's be serious, I don't think that that's going to be part of your scope in this kind of project with the kind of money you're going to be making. So, and so just keep that in mind while you're developing this as well. Is the scope, don't allow scope creep to happen too much, because you are on a very limited budget. Do your best on that budget. Go a little bit above and beyond as much as you can, but don't go crazy. That's don't put hundreds of hours into something like this, when it would be more beneficial to maybe do a project on your own for a portfolio for hundreds of hours, or put that time into getting more clients, kind of thing. So that's kind of what I recommend for the HTML. For CSS, that's for CSS, the Flexbox layout. Remember, make the site responsive. Combining Flexbox features and media queries will make it relatively simple for a small site like this. That's kind of how I go about it. For all the JS, for JS, all you really need to do is handle the contact form. Maybe some, if you have a library, like I said, the Lightbox library, you'll have to handle the initialization of that library in the JS file. But not much else. It should be a very basic HTML file, maybe a couple event listeners here and there. So keep it as basic as possible. The contact form will just pretty much gather up all the information from your text boxes, your input boxes, and then send an AJAX request to your PHP contact form, your mailer.php function. The mailer.php then will then handle creating the email and sending it. This is all stuff very much like if you're looking at contact forms, definitely just Google, PHP contact forms. And there's plenty of resources out there. I've used them many times. I've used different ones here and there. I don't really have a preference too much for email contact forms. I just kind of use what's the best available at the time. So I won't go too much into depth on that one. And then once you're done, once you have it put together, once you're kind of happy with it, start testing and test heavily. Testing is a big portion of this. Test on all the different devices you own. I know you're not going to buy a device just for testing purposes, but usually you'll have a few devices around the house. Maybe your parents have some phones. Maybe they have a tablet. Test on everything that you can get your hands on. So because those weird aspect ratio devices like a really small phone or a strange sized tablet, those are the ones that are going to kill you with, getting all the responsivity right. Don't kill yourself. Again, you're doing a small budget project. That one time obscure, Palm phone that no one ever uses, you don't have to worry about solving for that. But something like an iPhone 4, an iPhone 5, those kinds of things, people still use those, at least while we're talking right now. And you might have to solve for a small screen like that. So make sure it works well on that. You also have your friends that can help you out. You're just starting out, so if you have friends around you that you can maybe send them a test link out to and just have them hammer the site for a couple minutes. That first initial experience that they have on the site, they could have a lot of input just off that. Just like, if they see any errors, like anything out of place, having someone that's distant from a project take a fresh look at it is a huge advantage. And that's why there's separate testing teams in big companies that handle this kinds of stuff. Because the developers that are working on the project are too close to it and they can kind of unsee some errors and stuff like that because they know how to handle them in their own mind, and you kind of hide it from yourself when you're really close to the project. So having a fresh look on it is a huge advantage, and if there's anything big, they'll see it right away and it won't take them very long. Usually they'll be happy to help, especially if you're just starting out. And again, another little tidbit, little advice that I give. So to save yourself from save your future self. If your client seems like he's going to be the kind of person that's going to update some assets on an annual or biannual or monthly basis, set yourself up for success in that kind of scenario. Make sure that you have a service contract worked out with them from the beginning. Again, that's talking about price. Don't want to talk about that too much, but make sure that is discussed, talked about. And B, set your development stuff up as well. So if you have something that's updated monthly, make sure that you kind of you label it properly within your file structure. So you can have a different folder for stuff that's updated like very consistently, different file names for stuff that's updated consistently, maybe with dates involved and stuff like that. Have your own cognitive structure for that, and make sure that you'll either document it or it's something that you've used multiple times and you'll know when you see it, because you don't know the next time you'll be updating it. If it's a yearly, you'll forget about all of this whole website because you've probably already done multiple different websites before that, and you would have forgotten the file structure of this one unless you've deliberately laid out yourself to succeed to have a very familiar file structure for stuff that's easily updatable. With that, I think that's it for the basic development side of a site like this. I'm going to pass it off to Matt to see if he has any comments or to move on to the next segment.
Well, I think that was covered quite well. And I think it kind of leads perfectly right into deployment. which is my next segment, segment number 4, deployment. So oftentimes when a customer is just refreshing their design, they'll want to keep the same setup that they have. So the same host, the same domain name, etc., which makes your setup rather easy. So the next points I'm going to be saying is assuming that they are staying on the same old setup, because they are just refreshing their old website from 2000, I think Mike said. So just keep that in mind when I say these next points. So assuming they want their setup the same, like I said, you can typically ask for FTP access and then upload your new site design. And this is, of course, assuming you want to go live right away, and then that's it. However, a lot of people will jump right to that step, and that's really not what you should be doing. One important thing to note is that if you're replacing the old existing website, it's actually a good idea to take a backup of it. Even if it is, like I said, supposed to be replaced, just take that backup. All setups are different, but in general, what I'll do is I'll create a new folder called old, and I'll put, and usually it all in caps just so I can see it, and I'll put all the old site files in there. And that's a good way to ensure that you don't delete something vital or have the site go down for a long time, in the event that, like, when you upload your new stuff, something goes wrong. You don't want to have too much downtime. And if something does go wrong, what you basically do is you just take out your old file, or take out your new file, and you copy those old files back to where they were, and then boom, you're back up and running in general. Also, keep in mind that I know Mike said, like, generally you won't be doing a CMS, but if you are doing a CMS, and assuming their old site has a CMS, also take a backup of that database. So if they have like an old WordPress thing and you're going to be updating it to just a real simple, HTML, CSS, JS with maybe just like a side note, like a couch CMS, something that you kind of like, I almost call those like a retrofit CMS, where it's not like super, super heavy. It's like you make your static site and then you put the CMS in really easy just for basic updates. Just the reason why I mention any of this is because you really should, don't be overwriting anything, including that database. Take a backup of that database, put those files in the old folder, like make an old folder, dump them in there. Just make sure you don't delete anything that you can't get back. And that's really, really critical. In addition to that, though, like, a site owner may actually want to keep the old site around for people to use for a few weeks before migrating over to the new one. Sometimes they'll want to get customer feedback on the new design before fully committing and taking the old site offline. Sometimes they're, humming and hawing over whether they want to keep a picture or something from there, so you just want to keep it in there. Every situation is different, but again, I'm going to reiterate this. Always remember to never delete something that you can't get back easily. Just back it up, even if the changes you're inputting seem trivial. I'll give a prime example of this. What happened to us a couple weeks ago, I was updating one of our old projects that isn't super supported anymore. It's called Free Photos Hamilton. Was kind of our full-time focus, is now definitely not anymore. But one of the things that I did was I was going through and I was just doing some updates, and foolish me did not take a WordPress update before updating a couple of the plugins, which caused like a crash and like some plugin conflicts and everything else. I don't know if you saw my Twitter post, but that's what that's referring to, the WordPress plugin conflict we got rid of or something. I can't remember how I worded it, but I put like the NASA guys dancing on there. It's just like something to note. Just always take a backup. Like, I thought I was doing something trivial and it wasn't. And then I was looking at old backups and I was like, oh God, like, how am I going to get this back? I'm going to have to just like work through it. I'm going to have to dump time into something that I just want to, keep up because it's still viable, but it's just, we're just not our full-time focus anymore. So just back it up, people. Make sure everything works once it's all up and running. Put the new website up, make sure everything's running just fine. And then that's it, basically. And then take that old site offline when your client says it's okay to do so. But I think, unless Mike has any more comments, I think we're good to go to the web news. Mike?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so web news. Android desktop and Chrome OS. So I'm gonna go through, like I always do with the every web news. I'm gonna go through some points here, and then I got some questions that we will discuss. So software ecosystems are meant to bridge the gap between different pieces of hardware. So for example, like a computer, like a desktop or laptop, and then also a tablet and a phone and a smartwatch. And these ecosystems bring together bring like things like notifications and other features that we all enjoy cross-platform, so we can continue to enjoy them at our desk or on the go. So for example, there's like a different version of like your email app that might be on your watch, on your smartwatch, versus the one that's on your desktop versus the one that's on your phone. So there's little different versions. So that ecosystem kind of keeps that experience as alive as it can. So in general, a lot of these ecosystems are bridging a literal OS gap, where people use multiple operating systems in a single device setup, such as Windows, Android, and Wear OS. So recently, the Pixel Slate was released, bringing a quote-unquote laptop-like tablet that can run Android apps on top of Chrome OS. This type of device is basically, instead of a hardware bridge, it's actually kind of like instead of a software bridge, rather, it's more like a hardware bridge of sorts, that is trying to bring you the portability of a tablet, the versatility of using familiar Android apps on your phone, while still having the ability to be used as a traditional laptop, assuming you buy the type cover for it. So this begs the question, where does Chrome OS fit into the equation when it leverages the use of Android apps? Should we have just an Android version that is, quote unquote computer friendly? Something that comes to mind is like Samsung DeX. Like, should Android be able to go into some sort of computer mode? And is this rather strange hardware/software bridge pointing towards a future of one OS on multiple devices? I will let Mike take it away from there.
Yeah, it's a good discussion because it's really coming to fruition now. And we can bring in another competitor, and that's the iPad Pro, especially the one that just came out. That's supposed to be kind of like your bridge between the laptop and the mobile experience. And the question that if we're talking about it from a web development perspective, let's say like this is a web development podcast. Could we use a Chrome OS or a iPad Pro device to become our full-time kind of mobile development station? And the answer right now is no. I don't think we could. Not all the tools that we need run on all those devices, especially not the iPad Pro. Chrome OS is kind of like a container, like a build of Linux, so you can probably get around that. Install, use Chrome OS as a base, maybe have it multi-boot into a Linux distro for your development needs. Use Chrome OS for kind of like your sit at home, watch Netflix kind of thing. You could probably get around it somehow. I haven't heard very good reviews on the Pixel Slate, which is unfortunate because the hardware of it looks absolutely amazing. It looks great. Like the screen is really nice. I like the aspect ratio for doing any sort of productivity work. But I just I don't know, like my workflow, I use Android Studio. I don't think that's going to run very well on a device like that. I don't think I could use Android Studio, obviously, on an iPad Pro. So that's out of the question. A Samsung DeX kind of situation, again, I don't think Android phones are powerful enough, even though they are getting very powerful, nor do they have the tooling required to really power a workflow like the one I would have for it. Like we were working recently with Matt, actually on the No BS News application downstairs, and I was using my Ultrabook, which is running a full copy of Windows 10, and I had it connected to two monitors, and that was really convenient. But even that thing, and it has a mobile i7 processor in it, that thing started chugging along after opening up a significant amount of Chrome apps and doing some compiling with Vue.js and having all that going. So I don't know. I think for a web development, even like a light web development workload, I don't think it's a viable solution right now. For a web design, on the other hand, having that stylus and being able to quickly create a wireframe, that's a different story. So I think I'll let you discuss that, since you're more of the design guy, and creating wireframes, I'm assuming, would be great on devices like that.
I think creating wireframe would be fine, because I do use Balsamiq. It's not my Balsamiq anymore. I think it's called Balsamiq Cloud, to make wireframes, and that's a web application. Like, I don't have anything downloaded for that, so like that should be totally fine. It should work just as intended. There's a pen there if you need to, draw up anything really quick. If you need to like draw up like maybe some people like to just make wireframes like just drawing. So there's a pen that you can purchase separately from the Pixel Slate, for example. And you can use that. It's like a stylus. So you could use that if you wanted to draw out your own wireframes like that really roughly. So like that part is absolutely possible, but the thing is like we bought a tablet for myself, like for work, to sort of be able to show off people and show off designs and other things to people, and it runs full Windows 10 Pro because we didn't want to have a device that was limited in what it could do. Like I'll go to a client's place and sometimes like the conversation will turn to, oh, can we quickly FTP in here and change this image? And it's, I'm sure that a Chrome OS, solution could do that, but it's just more, maybe it's just me, or maybe it's just us because we're maybe a little older. I don't know whether people are more used to doing things on their phone nowadays, but it's like one of those things where it's like I would turn to FileZilla before I go and look for some other random application. Now, I will say, to add salt to that I understand this is not web development related, but I do have a few friends in IT, and a lot of them do work remotely from their phone. And some of it's like really tricky, like server work. Like they'll type in full commands and everything on their phone, and I'm like super not down with that. I will say that I do SSH into a server that I have in the house here with an application on my phone, but I do not do complex things on there. I'll check some statuses and be like, all right, it's beyond saving from my phone. I'm going to go sit at a computer. These guys will do like full, like logging into servers, fixing infrastructures, a lot of stuff from their phones. So, if you're one of those people that do that, maybe you're getting the most from your phone, and maybe like a Chrome OS, like maybe the Pixel Slate would actually work great for you, assuming you could find every app that you would need for whatever you're doing. However, Mike made a good mention about the fact that like we couldn't run, as far as I know, Vue.js on this thing. Like you have to compile a Vue.js project down to like a basic site, and then you can FTP that up or whatever you're doing with it. You can't really do that with, as far as I know, with Chrome OS. Chrome OS definitely has its uses, but it's one of those things where, like the computer that I'm on right now is running Windows 10, the one that we're recording on. I'm not going to, if I want to go watch Netflix later on this computer, I'm not going to go and like get, a middleman OS, if you will. Like you were saying, like, oh, Chrome OS could be your, like kind of like your watch Netflix OS. I'm not going to go fire up, or even I'm not even going to dual boot this computer so that I can run another OS just so I can watch Netflix. I'm just going to watch Netflix on this more powerful machine. And so I think what a lot of my hesitation comes in is, where do these, I don't think they're considered hybrid OSs. Maybe they are, but that's kind of where I put them at. Is it's like, this OS doesn't really have a home to me. Android's sort of like your mobile thing. iOS is your mobile thing. Mac OS and Windows is more or less your desktop / laptop / workstation, whatever it is. They come in all types of like sizes and form factors nowadays. Android Wear, or whatever I think it's just called Watch OS, but whatever is on the Apple Watch, and Android Wear obviously on Android Wear watches. And then of course there's the whole like Samsung ecosystem with, I think it's like Tizen or Tizen or whatever on the watch. But like if you notice, like those are specific experiences and they all live somewhere. Why does Chrome OS need, and I put that in quotes, to leverage Android apps? And do you nearly need Android apps to run on your computer? And then that, to me, like my next, like I'm kind of going through the UX of it, right? So if you really want Android apps to run on your computer, first of all, you could run an emulator, like an Android emulator, or you can mirror your device. But why doesn't Windows, or like Google specifically, make an app that allow said Android apps to run in some sort of web view or whatever it would be inside of on your computer? And so you could just use, like I could post essentially from my computer onto Instagram, but it would be through like the official means. Like I don't know whether it'd be mirroring from my phone or however that would work, but it would be the official Android app running in some sort of container on my computer. And so, like, the fact that there's these holes in this conversation, to me, make it seem like what are we doing here? I don't know whether that like kind of leaves me at a no opinion. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I have too many questions for me to consider a purchase of a Chrome OS device. We've made Chrome apps in the past, and I do like Chrome OS. I have nothing against it, but it's just the fact of like, where does this thing live? I remember when the iPad Pro came out, the latest version, people were freaking out because it had the USB-C and people were saying like, oh, you could plug it into your camera, and there's like a new, I think Adobe was making a few applications specifically for the iPad Pro or something like that. And I never looked too much into it, so I might be incorrect in that, but it was something like that. It was like some sort of, I think it was Adobe, I think it was Photoshop was being made specifically for the iPad. And people were like, this is the future, like this is what's going on. But I was like, no, I'm like maybe because Apple has the pull, but in general, it's like, are they really going to make a specific app version for this when seriously, the real photo editors, the guys who are like needing to put out really, really quality, massive prints for studio work, those guys are not going to be using an iPad Pro. Maybe to dump the photos, but I don't think it's the future. And those are the power users of Photoshop. You know, those are the power users of Adobe applications. I don't see this, and Chrome OS falls into the same place. Like, to me, Chrome OS is a worse toy than an iPad, if that makes any sense. Would you give a kid an iPad or a Chrome OS? He's not gonna know what the hell is going on in Chrome OS. And it's running on this tablet, and it's like all this like fancy stuff. But where does Chrome OS live? Like, why isn't it just an Android tablet? You know what I mean? Like, why does Google have this thing where Android, admittedly it's been kind of dying down the past 3 years, but Android has and does run on tablets. Why do we have a Chrome OS tablet that runs Android apps, and then Android on a tablet, and then Android on a phone? Like what's going on here? Like, just choose an operating system and kind of go with it. Or in terms of Apple, I mean, they chose it, but it's all different. There's like the different, iOS, and then there's iOS for iPad, if, whatever differences there are there. I'm sure there are some on the development end. And then there's Mac OS. They're separate. Like, choose a path and don't, like, I don't know about you, but like, where does this product fit?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll address that. So, the Mac OS iOS conversation is something that I believe is happening internally as well, inside of Mac's internal studio. And the iPad Pro is, I think, a step in that direction, where I believe, it's known that Apple is creating their own processors. They're ARM-based processors, so they're not x86, which is, Mac OS is based on x86, right?
Right.
iOS is based on ARM. Mac is making their own ARM processors. They're making their own desktop class or laptop class ARM processors very soon. They're going to be ditching Intel and probably AMD fairly soon. Probably in the next 2-3 years, I'm guessing we're going to see our first Apple computer come out with a Apple processor inside of it as their like CPU. I believe that there will be a hybrid or some sort of a version of iOS that will power it when it comes out. So I think Mac OS will be phased out within, a certain amount of time. I think it's going to take a while, but I think there will be a device powered by iOS that's much more desktop friendly in the future. And I think that they're going to combine the operating systems. And then, okay, on the topic of Android and Chrome OS, there is a separate OS being built right now as well, called Fuchsia OS. That's the working name and like the internal name. It's probably not going to be called that in the end, which will also be a very similar system where it will combine the phone and the computer into one OS. So I think what you're saying is correct, and I think internally they believe that as well. So I think that they are working towards a solution for that problem, where like, why have these two OSs when they both can do the same things that the other can do, and one is better at the other one's better at one. Like, it just, like, it doesn't make sense to have all these devices that can do all the same things when some of them suck at those things. Like, why? It doesn't make sense. I completely agree with you. Like, the one thing that I'm battling with right now, actually, in terms of having multiple devices, is the fact that for my development device, I have a PC, a computer that can do almost all the development I need, but it can't do iOS development. Like, I cannot create a IPA file on my Windows PC. Like, it's just not possible. My struggle right now is the fact that my next development computer, and I don't know when this is going to be, maybe in the next 2 years or so, is probably going to have to be a Mac OS computer, because I don't want to have 15 different devices, or I don't want to have to carry around 2 different laptops with me when I travel, because of the fact that I have to, program on, like, I do actively make iOS applications currently. I might not make them in the future, but right now I am. So I need a Mac, and I have an older Mac right now that I bought, we bought secondhand for the business. It's a MacBook Pro from like 2011 or 2012. It's working just fine for kind of like, being a proxy for creating IPAs, because we're just doing web applications, packaging them through Cordova and creating the IPA. It's kind of only doing the IPA side, which is fine. But if I were to have to go in and create, iOS features in that and embed create a whole app inside it with Swift and create an iOS application, it would be kind of a pain. It's slow. I did put an SSD in it, but it is slow. Like I can run a couple applications. It does chug along. Compiling takes quite a bit. So it'd be kind of a pain to move on from that. So the only solution I see is to switch to a Mac device, which is really, really against my I don't like Mac OS. I don't like Apple's goals. I don't like the fact that they charge the money that they charge for computers that aren't worth it, in my opinion. But they're really pigeonholing me in this situation. And I don't know what to do about that. I guess that's more of a separate discussion, to be honest, but it's kind of annoying me. And this talk of, multiple OSs and having to carry around multiple devices kind of brought it up again. And I don't really know what to do about that situation. But yeah, I think that's it. Like I think that's my, like, I internally, both companies, Matt, have solutions to your problem. That's how I see it.
And we assume, like, assuming everything goes correctly, we assume that they're going to come to light soon-ish.
Yes, exactly. They're going to come to light soonish, and they'll. I don't know how good they're going to be. I don't know if they're going to be good solutions, but I think that they are. They do see the ridiculousness of having 2 separate OSs that do the same things. They are moving towards a unified solution, so that it's a good thing, in my opinion. I think, as long as they don't screw it up. But that's really where I stand on it.
Well, I would say their biggest fear, or at least my biggest fear if I was in their shoes, would be the Windows RT incident. And I'll call it an incident because Windows RT really didn't get that much popularity. Like, it didn't really get that much, like, that many apps. It really didn't get that much recognition. It really didn't get what it was aiming to get. And because Windows RT, for those of you who don't know, was the ARM or ARM version of Windows. And it was around the Windows 8 era, if I remember correctly. And it was just like, it just really didn't hit it off. And I think it was because it's like you're using Windows, but I'm using Windows RT. You know what I mean? It's always like that. Oh, you're using that. You know what I mean? It's that separation. And I would say that one thing that is weird is Mac, or Apple specifically, is supposed to be making a Mac Pro, like the Mac Tower or whatever, that's supposed to be more true to the professional, right? They had like the little trash can design or whatever you want to call it, and that was, considered kind of not professional friendly. And so they've kind of pledged, so from what I've heard from my Mac friends, I don't like follow Mac that much, but from my Apple fanboy friends, they say that, Apple has essentially pledged to making a really good professional desktop experience again. If they're doing that has to be x86, in my opinion. Now, I kind of get, that's a really good point you brought up, because I was mentioning the whole Photoshop or whatever Adobe app was being made for the iPad. That is ARM. So if they are, like that is kind of a step. I kind of see why people are freaking out, where it's like, that is kind of a step. Like, hey, somebody's remaking something for ARM. But I struggle with like, I understand that transitions are always kind of difficult, right? Where there's always like this weird, like the transition into smartphones was weird for people, but it wasn't so weird as like, oh, by the way, none of these applications work, you got to restart. Like, think about people's digital libraries or even just if they're not digital, of just like CD keys that they own, right? Of all of these pieces of software they own on their computers. and maybe they'll stop using it in a few years due to them being old or whatever. But think about all the accumulation of software that people have on a computer. I have a massive CD wallet behind me of like all like old games and software and everything from literally the 90s onward, like maybe like really late 90s, 2000 onward to today. And like they're just CDs, and that stuff's for x86. That stuff is not for ARM. ARM, as far as I know, did not exist back then, or at least it wasn't in the consumer hands. And so like I wonder if this is going to be this isn't a transition of like, oh, Samsung's going a new design direction and people don't like the new design. It's not as simple of a controversy as that. This is literally a fundamental shift, and I can see it failing myself. I could see it flopping hard. Like I could see these big boys in the space being like, you know what? I'm not going to make an app for that. And then you're screwed. Really.
It's definitely possible. And like we see there's Windows laptops out there now, and I don't know if you know this, but there's Windows laptops running ARM processors, the 835 and the 845, and they're running emulated x86 on them. So I mean, any Windows Store app is running on ARM, obviously, but any other application, you can install any application or almost any application on them from Windows, are running in an emulated environment, and they're lower performance, but not like so low that you can't use it like before it was. Like I know that there was an attempt to do this a while ago and it failed horribly, but this time they've actually kind of done a better job. At least it's not the greatest job ever, but a better job. The advantage of these devices is that their battery life is ridiculous. Like I'm pretty sure you get like 27 hours of battery life on a Windows device.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, like especially if you're using the ARM side of it, like if you're using Edge and if you're using like Windows applications and stuff, like you're
Windows
gonna get
10 Mail or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to get a lot of battery life, and then you also have the option of not using those applications and using actual things. So I don't know if Apple's going to go that way though. I don't see Apple compromising and being like, no, we're going to allow x86 applications on these devices. I feel like they're going to be the ones that are going to be like, if you want to be part of Apple ecosystem, you have to create either a web app or you have to create a ARM based application for our system. And I don't think they're going to roll out the OS or a device with the OS without having all of their essential applications already created in ARM, ready to go for the consumer. Like I can see them delaying it severely just based on that, because they're very much first impressions are key and first impressions are king kind of thing. And they know, they can see what happened with Windows RT and stuff. And I'm sure that they're smart enough to learn from it. So it's like, it will be unfortunate because like you said, people have libraries of old x86 stuff and they probably won't be able to use them on the Macs. On the Mac side of it. On the Windows side, you can. Like I said, Windows is very compatible with everything, and that's kind of where they're going. But Mac is, in my eyes, I don't think they're going to allow anything other than their own ARM proprietary stuff on there. Like that's how I see it. Mac's very elitist in that sense and very clean. Like they won't want a deprecated experience, even just allowing another application on there that doesn't run natively.
And another thing that could delay them quite a lot is, realistically, they really could, like, and this is 100% speculation, they really could get rid of iOS and just have a new OS on everything.
Yeah.
I think
that would be the goal. Yeah, that would be the goal.
Because otherwise they're kind of jury rigging again, I guess. Although at the same time they'll be like, iOS is still getting expanded, so I mean, all they would be doing is adding a mouse interface. It's not exactly the craziest thing in the world to assume, but I also didn't know that thing about x86 emulation at all. Actually, I had no idea. I honestly thought that ARM was dead until we started talking about it right now. Other than obviously iPad, I knew that, but I never thought of it as like if Apple is doing that, if Apple's doing that processor stuff, if it's looking at, getting an operating system, a desktop one working on an ARM processor, then that's what the freak out was. I knew that people were freaking out because it was an iPad, but my whole thought was, well, who cares? It's an iPad. I'm not going to be doing professional video editing on there, probably. Maybe in a pinch, but generally probably not. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, this is going to be interesting. I don't know what else to say, because this is literally a fundamental, I don't think this can be understated. This is a fundamental shift in computing if this does go this way. A fundamental shift that failed once or twice for a couple of companies. So it's going to be super interesting. And I wonder whether, because Apple's always sort of been the separate devices kind of company, if that makes sense. So like kind of how the Surface is like a tablet and a computer if you buy the type cover. I mean, they obviously have the Surface Studio and stuff, but in the first iterations, they were the Surface was just the Surface tablet. And then the Surface Book came along later. But what's interesting is that Apple has always been here's your desktop experience, and there's two types, right? The all-in-one or the tower. Then you have your laptop. Then you have your iPad in various iterations. And then you have your watch, again, or your watch and your phone, all in different iterations across all these products for different price points in that. But they've always been that separation, right? This is the watch, this is the phone, this is the iPad, this is the computer, etc., etc. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with an OS, but maybe that'll solve my ecosystem problem.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. I think that's it. I kind of want to lay down.
Yep.
To be blunt, and I do have to edit this and upload it tonight. So unless you have anything else to say, Mike, I think I'm going to run the old conclusion.
Do it up.
All right, well, thanks for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on the socials via @HTML All The Things. That's on Facebook and Instagram. We are on Twitter @HTML Everything. We're also on Medium, which we now put the show notes on. We are also on GitHub. And we're also on Patreon, and Patreon's at patreon.com/HTML All The Things. Check out the tiers and give that a go. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you are listening to this on. And we are signing off.